Good morning. Good morning, all. Well, I think it's good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are. My name is Laknath Jayasinghe. I'm the webinar presenter today, talking about emerging trends in branding. We'll be talking in about, well, I'll be starting in about 5 minutes. We'll wait till some more attendees log in. So yeah, just bear with us. Hope you're all doing well. I mean, it's a incredibly strange moment, I must say. I'm myself based on the Jindal Global University campus. I live very close by to campus, but three and a half weeks ago, I moved from my apartment to campus during the lockdown. So it's a beautiful campus. So we've got lots of room, lots of fresh air. And so on, but it's still nonetheless quite a strange moment. How are you all doing? You know, what are you all doing to occupy yourselves? I imagine you're either studying or working. Maybe you can sort of type in something into the question box or answer box and let us know what you're doing to occupy your time during this COVID moment. So I take it most of you, if not all of you, are here because you're interested in, well, either one of three things, I imagine. You're interested in Jindal Global University, and I'll talk a bit about that later. Same with Jindal Global Business School. I imagine you're interested in taking up a degree program here. And I hope you're also interested in my area of expertise and professional life, which is branding. So I hope you're here for these, either one of these reasons. If anyone's here around branding, for branding, hi, so I've had a question from Nandini Mittal. I wonder if that's my former student, Nandini. If you are my former student, Nandini, hi. Even if you're not, hi, it's another Nandini Mittal. Hope you're doing well as well, keeping well. So perhaps Nandini, I'm not sure if you're my former student or not, Nandini, but either way, perhaps you could tell us what you might find interesting about branding. And then I've had Prashant Jain saying, taking up some online courses, suggest some basic courses to take up before the MBA. Does that mean you want me to suggest some basic courses before taking up an MBA? And if so, perhaps we can chat about that toward the end of the presentation. Toward the end of the presentation when we have the chat function. I have Aditya Vashni. Good morning. You're interested in the promotion of a particular product or company by means of advertising and distinctive design. Fantastic, fantastic. Hopefully you will gain some knowledge through this webinar. And if you're interested, I'll give everyone my my email address. If you're interested, you can get in touch with me afterwards as well. Kabir Sharma has, hello, and you have said, I'm joining the webinar, this webinar to learn something about ops management. I can't help you there. I'm not I very, very, very tangentially, very sort of, in a very minor way, know about ops and operations management. I'm a brand management specialist. I'm a consumer behavior researcher, quite well trained, and I know my stuff around those areas. but I hope you're here to learn something as well about branding and brand management. If not brand management, I hope if you're not here directly for brand management, I hope you learned something anyway. But I can put you in touch with my colleagues who are in the operations field. So at the end of the seminar, I'll give you my email address, my email address, and you can get in touch with my colleagues here at Jindal. Oh, Nandini, you are my former student, so hello. It's very nice to have you on board. And you're saying these days I'm taking online courses like Google Ads. Fantastic. And you're saying in respect to branding, you're wondering how it would change globally post the pandemic. Very cool, very good question. Hold that question and type it in. I'm going to start in a moment, actually, start the sort of presentation in a moment. So hold it and then type it in toward the end, and we'll discuss that toward the end. Prashant says he's interested in campaign designing and branding. Fantastic. You're here partly for the right reasons. We're not going to get into the full gist of all of that, of course, today, but hopefully we can touch on some of those interests. And Vatsal is saying, I'm not audible. So I'm not sure how I can help you there. We do have also online my colleague from admissions who's sort of also a specialist with the software, so perhaps he can get you in touch with you. Okay, and one last question before I head off to the presentation. So how should one analyze the upcoming market situations in order to get a first move advantage? Aditya, hold the question and we'll go through toward the end. Atul is saying we have been muted from your end. No, I'm not muted. I'm not muted. People can hear me. Again, perhaps you get in touch with Himanshu, who's Himanshu Sadana, who's okay. Yes, Atul saying we are muted. So you are muted. You use the chat function to talk to me. Okay, I'm going to start. So welcome all. You're in the right spot. You're in the right seminar. You haven't entered the wrong room. My name's Laknath Jayasinghe. I'm a professor here in marketing at Jindal Global University, Jindal Global Business School. I also hold the designation. I'll talk about this in a moment. I also hold the designation of Vice Dean in my school. And those who knew me, my former students knew me, I was Vice Dean for Research, overseeing research. But early this year, I've moved across, and it's probably more in line with my specializations around internationalization. Just to let you know, these are our details down here. We're based in Sonipat. I'm in Sonipat. I'm on campus, and I'll give you my email address at the end. So let's get moving. Okay, how do I do this? Okay, so what we're going to talk about today, I'm just going to introduce a bit about myself and then talk a bit about, very quickly, Jindal Global University. You probably know a bit about the university, but I'm just going to give you some of the aspects around the university from my point of view, particularly as a foreigner, like why I might have come here to JGU and also to JGBS, and I'll give you a bit of a feel for JGBS in a moment. Then I'll be getting into the guts of why I've been called to do this webinar and talk about my area of expertise, which is around branding. And then what I'm going to do is talk around pretty much four emerging areas in line with my research areas, my research streams, and we'll discuss that I think it'll probably go for about 40 minutes. So I've got four themes, I want to spend roughly about 10 minutes on each one. And then toward the end, we'll go for about a 10 or 15 minutes Q&A. And the Q&A, I've now opened the chat box. Let's see how we go. I am happy at this early stage of the presentation. As I'm talking, if you have a question, to type your question in the question box and I can answer. But if I'm running out of time, I will say I'm just going to answer the questions at the end, right? Because sometimes too many questions slows down the momentum of the presentation and we get run out of time. So what I'd rather do is let's see how we're going with questions. If I'm moving well, we'll keep going. Otherwise, I'll say hold the question and we'll take it toward the end. Okay, so I mentioned before, I'm a professor in marketing here at Jindal Global Business School. I was promoted this year from associate professor to professor. I hold also the designation of Vice Dean. So now from this year, I oversee the internationalization activities, things like student exchange, things like faculty exchange, things like faculty research and conferences and so on. And as an Australian, I mean, many of you, some of you, I don't know how many of you know me from the audience, but some of you who know me will know that I come from Australia, from Melbourne, and over here at Jindal, we also have a Centre for India-Australia Studies, and I'm the Associate Director for that centre. A bit about me. I don't want to talk too long about this, but I mentioned I'm from Australia. I'm from Melbourne. I was born in Melbourne. I was raised in Melbourne. My parents migrated from Colombo in Sri Lanka many decades ago and to Melbourne, and they still live in Melbourne. They're self-isolated in Melbourne right now. I went to high school in Melbourne. My first degree was in the sciences at one of Australia's, I think it's now ranked #2, the University of Melbourne. Then I worked for a couple of years and I went back and did a marketing degree, a BBA. In Australia, we call it a BBiz, Bachelor of Business. And I did a marketing degree specializing in marketing, but also taking a second major in media and film and communication studies, sort of marrying the two. During my marketing degree, I mean, many Aussies work during their degrees, and I worked during my marketing degree in the advertising sector as well. This was in Brisbane, in Australia, the north of Brisbane, north of Australia. I worked in the global advertising agencies whilst I was studying. And then when I finished, I went out and worked for a number of years. At some point, I think it was about 6 years later, I felt I needed to do more study, and I went back to the University of Queensland, again, another top-tier Australian. I think it's sitting around global top 40, global top 45, I think. It's an Australian university, global top 45. And I did my research masters in an English department, actually, because what I was trying to do was gain some sort of academic weight in the area of cultural theory, which I then applied in my PhD back in Melbourne at Melbourne Business School. And my PhD was looking at applying the cultural theory I got from my MPhil, my research masters, and applying it to the area of my study was basically what householders do, people at home in their family homes do, how they engage with television advertising. I've taught at a couple of Australian universities. Some of you might have heard of these universities. Monash University is a top-tier Australian university. I taught an advertising course there, and I was a faculty member there I think it was about 15 years ago now. My first post-PhD job was at the University of Newcastle, a beautiful place in Australia, 2 hours north of Sydney. and I was teaching marketing communications and consumer behavior to MBA students there. More recently, from 2013 to 2016, I was in Sydney teaching masters, undergrad and postgrad students, brand management and social media management and consumer behavior to, as I said, postgrads and undergrads at Macquarie University. Macquarie is in Sydney. It's about 10 kilometres out of the very, the downtown area of Sydney. I also have commercial experience. I have about 14 years now, all up, commercial experience, mainly in the early days around my advertising work in advertising media planning. But since I finished my MPhil in 2005, I've also been embedded either full-time or part-time doing consulting in brand and media and consumer research for clients. Some of the firms I've worked at, the first two firms listed there, Zenith and Mindshare, are part of the global WPP organization. Fantastic working for this global juggernaut, if you want to put it that way. Great time in my life. And the next three are consulting firms. The next three are consulting firms. Oops, sorry, I'm just backtracking. Consulting firms in Melbourne. And actually Ward 6, the last one, is where I spent the last year and a half before coming to Jindal in 2017. I was research director. Ward 6 is a very well-known Sydney-based advertising agency. And I was research director there, handling research. My teaching strengths, of course, are in branding, brand management. I've taught social media management. I'm a consumer behavior specialist as well. I teach also here at Jindal, or have taught strategic management quite successfully to the postgrads. And I currently teach to the undergrad students a course called Media and Society. Just bear with me. And also I teach an elective here called Gender and Consumption, which is a really exciting course, tapping into the sort of global discourses, the global currents that we read in the press around gender, and sort of looking at it from a local and transnational point of view and the implications for branding and consumer behavior. My research, as I mentioned, I'm a consumer behavior specialist. I look at what people do with brands, how they use brands, and how they use advertising. I'm published in the top tier journals in my field. I'm quite proud of this paper. This came out in 2013 now. It came out in the top tier, one of the top tier business school journals, Journal of Consumer Research. It was voted in 2014, the year after, as the bottom point there says, a top 16 must read by a very influential think tank composed of the editors of all the top tier journals in marketing. So I was quite proud of that. And parts of that were also replicated or reprinted, should I say, in one of the globe's foremost literary magazines, Harper's Magazine. It's considered sort of second to the New Yorker magazine. So I was quite chuffed. More recently, I published in another top tier marketing journal. This came out last month, called Marketing Theory, and that was with a paper published with my co-authors in Sydney. Some of the firms I've either worked at directly or consulted through firms I've worked at or consulted directly. I'll just go through this. Some of these are familiar to you. Some are global, like the Red Cross or Target and Kmart, sort of big discount department stores. Global cosmetics like Maybelline. Pharmaceutical companies like Novartis and Gilead, the big global juggernaut. Big dairy food companies, global multinational food companies like Kraft Foods and Parmalat, the Italian multinational that's sort of everywhere nowadays. Australian utilities like the energy companies, AGL and Energex, Australia Post, like our India Post here in India, and then of course banks like our big bank in Australia called National Australia. We've got 4 big banks. NAB, National Australia, is one of them. So I've sort of traversed my experience and across a number of domains, that, you know, as I say, I've had 14 years commercial experience. So of course, I'm going to have worked across a number of clients, a number of sectors, a number of high-profile work as well. Okay, in this section, I really want to get into a discussion of JGU just very quickly and JGBS. So some of my former students will sort of go, oh, I know that right now. I mean, I'm on campus, and the reason I put this picture here is because I'm very proud of our campus. It's a very beautiful campus, and I put this here to sort of say, well, this is where I work. It's a great greenfield campus, you know, an architecturally designed building. I love it. And as you can see down the bottom there, you might have seen this picture elsewhere. As you can see, we have a number of sort of disciplinary streams for the MBA program, ranging from marketing management to finance to ops. I think one of the audience members earlier said they're interested in operations, human HR management, HRM, and also we have a business analytics stream as well. Okay, just very quickly about Jindal. So last year we were quite proud of this. We were given the tag of Institution of Eminence, which is fantastic. We were only one of a very, very select handful of Indian institutions, and in particular private universities, private institutions in the country to be given that. And that sort of allows us to do various things. It's a tough thing to attain, but it's even tougher to hold on to. So we're working very hard to ensure that we keep this Institution of Eminence tag going right through into the future. Earlier this year, sorry, late last year, we also entered the global 800 global universities, which for us as a university of 10 years of age is fantastic, and that's a real testament to the strength of the faculty and the programs, the student body, and the employment outcomes as well from the university. So we're all very chuffed at that. Along with that, and these rankings come from the QS global ranking system, which is the most well-known university ranking system used widely in the world. We've also voted within the top 150 global universities aged under 50. And as I said, we're aged just on 10 years, so we're all very chuffed with that. One of the other things, I don't want to sort of sound as if I'm bragging, but I am, is that we were the youngest university to be ranked in the top 1,000, which, you know, when my Aussie friends, you know, email me, they're like, wow, because when they thought, when I came here, they thought I had lost my mind and had gone spiritual or something, which I am. I'm interested in all those things, but they very much, see the beauty of this place now. Jindal's a small university compared to many other like large-scale Indian and certainly large-scale Australian universities. Say the University of Melbourne, where I've come from, I think now has up to about 70,000 students. And if you look at, say, large-scale Indian universities like Delhi University has upwards of, I think DU has either 70 or 100,000. You know, someone might be able to help me, but one of these massive universities, we're certainly not like that. Where I sort of describe Jindal to my Aussie friends and my colleagues from Australia as a very large, it's got the intimacy of a very large Australian high school. It's got that sort of feel where sort of people know each other. We have 5,100 students, 510 plus faculty across different degree programs. Importantly, we really reflect the global in JGU, right? We really reflect the global, and that's borne out in faculty. We have 51% of faculty coming who are either foreign faculty like myself, or they're Indian nationals who've also been trained at top 200 global universities. And talking about foreign faculty, we have 76 full-time. These figures were from late last year. 76 full-time international faculty from over 30 countries. So, in terms of the exposure to global sort of discourses and so on, yeah, that's one thing I really enjoy about this place. In terms of the business school, we're the second largest school. Jindal Global Law School is the largest, and by a factor of 3, and we're the second largest. So you can imagine how big that school is, the law school. We have around 900 students. We've grown enormously in terms of faculty. When I came here, we had 22, and now we've got 70 plus faculty. Our faculty come from, I'll sort of do a swap around the points. Our faculty, the international faculty come from internationally trained faculty come from top tier institutions around the world. Our Dean, Professor Rajesh Chakrabarti, an Indian national, did his MBA at IIM Ahmedabad, and then did his PhD at University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. We have faculty from New York University, Professor Ronita Chaudhary. Myself, of course, I come from Melbourne University. One of our other vice deans, Anirban Ganguly, for example, comes from Stevens Institute of Technology in New Jersey. Fantastic top-tier university, business school in the US. We have faculty from AUT in Auckland and Dublin Technological University as well. Those who come from India and have been trained in India are from the top-tier Indian suite of schools as well. We have those from the top-tier IIMs, the top-tier IITs, XLRI in Jamshedpur, fantastic business school as well, and MDI Gurgaon, for example. Now, I sort of get this question asked almost on when students are here, almost on a daily basis. And it's not a bad question. It can seem bad, but it's not. But it's like, sir, why are you here? And they don't mean that in a get out of our country sort of way. They mean that you've done all these other things, and why are you here in India? And I could go on for an hour to answer that, but just very briefly, one of the significant things that attracted me to Jindal, over and above my former universities that are taught in Melbourne, was that our business school here teaches with a fairly large component built through the liberal arts. So if you're studying either in the BBA program, and that's a 3-year program straight out for students straight out from high school, or if you're studying in the 5-year BBA plus 2-year MBA, the integrated BBA MBA program, which is 5 years, again, you'd be straight out of high school often, or you're studying in the 2-year MBA program, which means you've probably got you've first done a bachelor degree and maybe have had some experience as well in the workspace. You will be taking up courses, no matter which of those 3 programs you're in, you'll be taking up courses, compulsory core courses in the liberal arts, like history and philosophy and sociology. And this is fantastic. This is something that, as my bullet point down the bottom says, really gives students an edge in the marketplace. It develops critical thinking skills. It gives you exposure. It makes you both locally and globally aware. It enables you, importantly, to situate your brand management or ops or finance management studies and the work you're learning from those areas. It enables you to situate it in a cultural context, right? A social context, doing something good for the community with the business knowledge that you've learned. And importantly, it gives you an edge. It gives you a roundedness. It doesn't mean that you're a finance nerd, just a finance nerd. You're able actually to enter discussions, at a global level around politics and social discussions around what are the, well, here we are in a sort of pandemic situation, what might be some of the critical ways through which people are talking about how to restart the economy. I know in Australia, they're saying we need a softer feel to Australia going forward. And what they mean by that is the hard-edgedness of corporate capitalism needs to be tamed. And, these are the sorts of things that you get from that liberal arts component. So, and I'm a big believer. I mean, of course, I did my MPhil in an English department. So it's not just that, but it's partly that. But I do see the extreme value of having this balanced, rounded edge to people who come out from technical degrees, like from business schools and engineering schools, for example. You need something else to complement it. Okay, let's move in to why we're here. Oh, sorry, I'm just looking at Purushot's comment. I almost took admission at the University of Adelaide. Wow, well done. And of course, the pandemic situation has really, sort of stopped many things, I must say. And, Adelaide University is a top tier as well. So maybe next year, keep that in mind, but come to us and then go. Okay, let's talk about branding. And what I'm going to do, how are we going for time? Yeah, we're right on time. What I'm going to do is talk for roughly 10 minutes on each of these 4 domains, and then we'll go to a Q&A, okay? Roughly 4. And if I'm running out of time, I've got 2 videos to show you. If I'm running out of time, I might skip on one and just give you the link. Or, if you want to contact me, you can contact me and I'll give you the link for the other video. Okay, so let's get going. So the first perspective I'm going to talk about is this perspective called the brand culture perspective. And this, if we were sitting in a business school, even 5 or 10 years ago, but really from, the genesis of teaching branding, which has its genesis back 50, 60 years ago, the standard of approaches were built from consumer and brand psychology. And that sort of approach, particularly from the 80s onwards, was sort of looked at the debates from this sort of, how does a brand move through culture? Is it standardized or does it adapt? So, a foreign brand coming into India, does it get standardized across geographies, or is it adapted? Does it get adapted to the Indian geography, the Indian culture? And when we talk about it in those ways, the standard way to actually talk about it is through brands and geographies, so you might and assume that there's a static culture in those geographies. So we might talk of for example, a Rajasthani culture or a North Indian culture, or a Southern culture, or a Maharashtri culture, right? It assumes that these are very static. There's not anything going on that allows for dynamism. And increasingly over the last 2 decades, there's been a new perspective that's come on board, which derives its sort of lenses. It takes its lenses from cultural anthropology, cultural studies, and this is called the brand culture approach. And this sort of focuses on how consumers view terms like global and local and the interactions. And, you think about the current world we're in, and indeed, our colleague in the audience, Purushot, just mentioned on the chat function, he was planning to go to Australia, to Adelaide. And just think about how now in this world, a lot of us, not right now, of course, under lockdown, but previously, and I have no doubt afterwards as well, when things settle down, we will be moving around. And there might be differences in how we move around, but we will be moving around. And if that's the case, we're bringing a bit of our cultural backgrounds into that space, the new geography, as well as the new geographies impacting us. And it's sort of a dynamic sort of process. And I want you to sort of start thinking about, instead of thinking of these static terms, you know, a Delhi culture, a Kolkata, you know, a sort of Bengali culture, as they say. And so I want you to think about how these cultures are being impacted from abroad through transnational media forms like social media, Facebook, television. Television is now on these screens, for example, and so on. So I just want you to sort of, I want you to sort of start thinking about this brand culture approach. And the brand culture approach, as the last bullet point there says, argues that brands are part of culture. They're not solely part of a marketing strategy platform. They are, of course they are, and they're first and foremost part of that. But a brand manager needs to understand how these brands are now becoming part of culture, and how people themselves work on the brands and take up the brands, for example, in terms of self-identity, and we'll talk about that in the next three themes, right? So brand managers need to be aware of how brands are now becoming part of this transnational and global culture, and how a local brand may face tensions, or even a global brand may face tensions entering a culture and sort of having to, if we put it, adapt, but not adapt, you know, in terms of becoming Indian, a foreign brand becoming Indian. How does a foreign brand, and the word we use is glocalize, how does a global brand localize, G-L-O-C-A-L, localize in a local geography. I'll give you some examples. This graphic is actually coming from one of my heroes, Douglas Holt, who was a professor of marketing, consumer behavior at Oxford and Harvard. And this graphic, the red describes the mainstream ways of thinking of culture. And every so often we have a cultural rupture, like right now in this COVID moment. People are starting to question, now that we've had a pause, and some people, to put it in inverted commas, many people have, to put it in inverted commas, being pissed off with global corporate capitalism. There's a hard-edgedness about it. And now that we're having a pause, people are starting to think and reflect going forward, is this what we want after things open up? And so this sort of feeds into broader, what we call discourses, bodies of ideas and discussions, like say around, say, climate change, for example, or overpopulation, for example, or even the global connectedness. I mean, something that happened, if we trace COVID back to Wuhan, back a wet market in Wuhan. Here I am in Sonipat, and some of you might be in different parts of the country. Indeed, some of you might be overseas too. But here we are, we're all impacted about something that happened in regional India, in a wet market in regional China 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months ago, right? So we're being impacted. And then in society, these cultural ruptures occur, and they open up, say like climate change, which 20 years ago was sort of a small discourse, but now climate change is a major issue. And brands, ideally, in the Holtian framework, brands embed themselves into the cultural narratives and the stories, right, going on. And I'm going to give you an example. I'm going to show you, this is Nike's Dada Ding. Now, I hope we have a good connectivity across the network here. I'm sure we will. I'm only going to show you 1 minute of this, just for time's sake. This is Nike's landmark Dada Ding, D-A-D-A-D-I-N-G. ad campaign from 2016. I want you to think about how Nike embedded themselves into an emerging discourse, cultural narrative of female empowerment. And in this situation, it's about empowerment through sports. I'm going to play it, and I'm just only 1 minute. It goes for 2.5 minutes. But as you're watching it, just think about, whoops, I jumped ahead. I just wanted to think about what the brand managers and the brand management team was trying to do. Oops, sorry, let me just go back. Here we are.
Wake up in the morning, all systems on go, cause I got goals and I won't take no for an answer. Got the mix of a dancer, the heart of a panther. I don't understand you. It puts in your vocab. I cannot quote that. I want this so bad. I cannot go back. I cannot back down. I will not give up. You versus me, huh? I say good luck. You don't want this problem. I don't do it unless I go full throttle. And I might throw it on Instagram just to show you what the difference is. Inside the most of the rooms, cause I run the runners. Shoot the shoes, look in the mirror, I ain't gonna do this. I only have to shit myself. That's why I keep the coach on the show. Never lay me on the bad for my health. That I ain't, bada boom. Now let's go.
Okay, I could keep going on. It's a very, very, in my mind at least, a very powerful ad, and it's a branding ad, and it's sort of is setting the scene for what Nike intended to do back in 2016 with regard to entering the local cultural conversation about female empowerment in this country. And when I first saw this ad back when I came here in 2017, I was like, wow, I've come to the right place. Okay, so that's one way through which this brand culture approach works, entering the cultural conversations. That's the still from the ad. Another way through which it works, I'll touch a bit about this in a few moments' time, is Coca-Cola, for example, has developed the Share a Coke with. And this campaign, of course, actually, I must say, it started off in Australia, where the name of your friend or relative, you could, personalize the bottle, a friend or whoever it was, you could personalize the bottle to your friend's name. And what Coke is trying to do here is embed the brand in a social discourse whereby it's trying to strengthen the bond. So it's Share a Coke. Coke is not something you necessarily have by yourself, but it's something you actually do with your friends or relatives. There's another flip side to this, debate or this perspective. Brands can get into what we call brand trouble when they sort of, particularly large brands that are sort of seen to be corporate titans that push their muscular weight around. And this is from a couple of years ago back in Tamil Nadu. There was a campaign to boycott Coke because it was seen that this foreign multinational was taking our local water resources, right? And so Coke it's not just entering a discussion about strategy here, it's the brand is entering a discussion of that global discussion that occurs in many countries about foreign brands entering locally. And, the ideal is actually to be respectful, right? The Coca-Cola example I mentioned before about Share a Coke leads into my second perspective, which is that brands now know that they have the ability to create what we call in the sort of anthropology, sociology world, linking social value. And if we go back to this idea, the traditional notion of brand value, they were linked to sort of strategy perspectives of image around the brand and brand awareness, right? And they didn't really take hold of the broader context within which the brand sort of swims in. which is that of, as the second point suggests, the fact that brands now embed themselves in a social world. They help us signal membership to various social groups. And so users may view brands as resources to connect with like-minded others. I often say when I'm teaching such concepts here at Jindal, I tell my students here, think about the brands we wear, students wear to class. And what they're doing is signaling to others that we're part of the same group, whether it's a Nike or a Gap or an Adidas or whatnot. We're signaling to each other through the brands that we wear or consume. Apple, I have an Apple iPod, for example, or an iPad, or an Apple iPhone. What does it say about me? Now, strategists can use this because what they can do is take this idea and instead of thinking about brand management purely in terms of image and awareness through those lenses of image and awareness, they can look at it in terms of the contribution that the brand has to strengthening that bond. Think about the Coca-Cola example I just gave you before, the share a Coke. Think about the contribution perhaps that Coca-Cola can have in a particular consumer situation amongst mates, for example, where the brand contributes to the strengthening of that social bond. And if we can quantify that and measure that, then we can get at some measure of linking value. Some examples. This is Royal Enfield, of course, your local heritage brand of motorcycle. Of course, it has a deep heritage linked to colonial India. It was formerly a British, iconic British brand of bike. And this is Royal Enfield in Thailand. The brand has moved out of the Indian geography and moved overseas, and it has quite a strong traction with a certain type of Thai consumer. And in Thailand, the brand actually has they have bike communities that travel around on the bikes together in groups over a weekend. And what they're doing, what the brand is overtly doing by doing that is strengthening the consumer's link to the brand by forming communal bonds amongst these riders. So it further cements and further embeds the brand in this social network. It creates this linking value of the brand to the social group within which it's embedded. Absolute Vodka does this. This came out, as you'll see what I mean, came out when in 2017, September 2017, when the High Court here in India decriminalized homosexuality. And Absolute Vodka has been a long-term supporter of the LGBT community over decades, globally and here in India. And at that moment, they produced a local campaign here, very much attuned to the decriminalization that happened in the High Court in September 2017. And then they reiterated the linking value that they have with the LGBT community, saying a moment they came out, so to speak, and said, hey, this is a moment, we're with you in this moment of national pride. Another example there. I also want you to think more locally about, the brands that we wear in our everyday lives, perhaps amongst groups of friends. This is Vans. I know that with my Australian students, when I left Australia in 2017, Vans had huge traction with certain student groups, particularly like, those on the edge of the culture, like, those in skating and so on, those subcultures, clubbing cultures and so on. And the brand very much knows this. and the brand embeds itself very much as part of an item to wear when you're part of a particular subculture. And thereby the brand, it's not just that the brand is sort of selfishly saying we're trying to tap in and rip you off. They are very much part of the culture. They display their, like Absolute Vodka has displayed over many decades, their commitment and support to the LGBT community. Vans has, over decades, supported the sort of subcultures around skating and snowboarding and so on. So it sort of displays its credibility. My third theme I want to talk about from a brand and culture point of view is how brands now very much embed themselves in as spaces. They, as the word we use in industry is we activate the brand in either certain social spaces or certain spaces or cultural events. And brands now are very much part of that co-creative effort. That's another word we use. Brands understand that they co-create with consumers meaning, right, by embedding themselves in certain spaces. So as the second point there says, we as consumers are invited to interact very much with brands in spaces and create meaning. For example, I've given the image here of an Apple store. You know, you go there, you're excited by the layout and the minimalism and the products on offer, and you're asked to engage. Another good brand that does that, a global brand that does that is Starbucks. Starbucks, the experience is not only just about the coffee and food, but it's the architecture and design, the layout. It's that you can sit there in these comfy sofas with your friends for hours, perhaps, unless you're thrown out because they're too busy. But so on, you're invited to interact with the brand in the space. Certain interactions occur where the brand is activated in these spaces. This is Coachella, the music festival in the US. And, you know, brands very much underpin the economics of developing these events now. You know, this is the DJ booth, one of the DJ booths at Coachella. And of course, as you can see, it's underwritten, it's sponsored by Absolute Vodka. And I mean, they're not making any, it's not even subtle, right? It's like you've got the bottle there. Hey, we are sponsoring this event. And, you know, sometimes in my classes, if I'm sort of talking about Absolute and sort of this sort of idea, I'll contrast it with club culture. I'll show an image of a YouTube clip, for example, of club culture back 3 decades ago. We'll go to the US or a British rave, an illegal rave where no brands were there. In fact, brands were not wanted there. And you can sort of see how club culture over the last 3 decades globally has become, some people might use it, infested, is the word. Some people might say infected by brands, but brands are part of, for better or for worse, part of that. And I think many people now accept that, and brands now are part of our social media space. As the last point says, they're useful for social media feeds for the brand, but they're also how we construct ourselves. For example, brands very much, if you're at Coachella, I'll be there with this, right? I'll be taking pics on my photos with my friends of my experience there at the DJ booth. And I'll be uploading it to Instagram or whatever is my choice of platform. And so the brand is very much part of our creating the cultural experience for me. It's not tangential. It's not a sideline to that. They very much are part of this idea of creating the experience. Hence the Absolute Vodka stall, Absolute Vodka underpinning of the DJ booth. And this media content then gets online, it's created as data, and then it does 2 things. It assembles and helps manage markets in real time, so that brand managers can tailor the offerings in real time if need be, right? Fascinating way. And, you know, some of you might be even embedded with this in your work yourselves, you know, fascinating way. And this is very, very new. I mean, this is, you know, 3-4 years old. I mean, you know, when I was working in the advertising world 15 years ago as an advertising media guy, this wasn't, I mean, okay, it was sort of developing, but not to the extent it is today. Okay, my last point, my last theme I want to talk about is that brands now, probably because of devices like this, we are much closer to brands. It's not, I'm saying this is the only reason, but one of the reasons. We are much closer to brands, and brands know this, and they make claims about their broader role in society. I mentioned before that one of the big discussions we're having globally is, you know, how do we want to move forward out of this post-COVID world? Do we want brands, in a brand management point of view, from a brand management point of view, are brands still going to be, are they going to be more compassionate and so on? And I think there is a role for that. But what consumers and indeed citizens expect now is that brands will match up to the claims they make. They are expected to be global citizens, and they're expected to enable us as well to be responsible global citizens. And the third point is reflective of this, where consuming a brand is now is very much an ethical and symbolic communicative act. We display our social and ethical bona fides to our friends and relatives by posting on Instagram or posting about my brand consumption with Starbucks, for example, or another ethical brand. We signal ourselves as ethical people to others. So it's this sort of symbolic communicative act brands also are part of. And we expect brands to help us do that now. And in a way, this ethical function, this ethical consumption, if we want to put it, is an important way that network capitalism, you know, functions. The way we talk about brands is we like or, well, unlike brands around this. Now, this also, you know, this point also brings up, and the fact that we're all online and can talk to brands, talk back to brands, creates this potential for what I've called, it's not just me who says this, but for potential for brand trouble. Now, I'm going to give you some examples, and I'll give you an example of brand trouble in a moment. But sort of think about Ben & Jerry's, you know, a foreign global brand, ice cream, something as vernacular as street level as ice cream, but the brand itself is has embedded. So Podil has asked me, what is brand consumption? Brand consumption, you could say, is the ways through which we engage with brands. What are the meanings we take from the brands that the brand managers have authored, put into the brand communication or the brand touch point? Do they synergize with our values? And therefore we take part, we engage well? Or is there some resistance around it? Oh my God, the brand is transgressing, right? But brand consumption essentially means brand engagement. We consume a brand and it becomes part of who we are. But in very much the way that Ben & Jerry's has, certainly in many of the Western economies and increasingly here as well, Ben & Jerry's is embedding itself in the discourse of ethical consumption. It supports ethical, socially responsible causes, and the brand is part of that, right? And therefore, by me consuming the Ben & Jerry's ice cream, not only am I consuming physically ice cream, but I'm consuming those brand values, right? They are becoming part of me. Now, I know Prashant is asking me some hard-hitting questions about why this is so. Can we leave that for the Q&A at the end? I've just got about 3 or 4 minutes to go with this discussion before we go to, not even 3 or 4 minutes, before we go to the Q&A. So hold the questions for the end. The Nike Dada Ding ad campaign is very much part of that. Nike understands. Nike has suffered backlashes over the last 3 decades, and they have understood that there's a lot riding on the equity in their global brand, and they know that to uphold that equity, that they need to be seen as good corporate citizens, because they are, for better or worse, they are one of these major global corporate juggernauts. So they can be seen as an American juggernaut pushing its muscularity around the world, you know, and taking out smaller players. So they very much go softly. Well, they play hard, but they also embed the brand in cultural discourses, local discourses, to say, hey, we're with you and we support you. Now, sometimes things go wrong. Pepsi did this a couple of years ago when it tried to embed itself in the emerging discourse around consumer protests and boycotts and so on. The Me Too movement, the emerging same-sex marriage movement in the West, the Occupy Occupy movement, and the 1% movement, and so on. Right, these protests, and he tried to embed itself in that discourse by saying, we're part of this global, we're supporting you and your values in these protests. But the campaign was pulled after 1 day because, well, it didn't, you know, as you'll see, this campaign featured Kendall Jenner, you know, part of the sort of Kardashian-Jenner family, who's famous just for being famous. She herself didn't have any prior brand history, celebrity endorsement history around supporting these movements per se. I'm going to play this ad. It goes for about 2 minutes, and I want you to think about it, 1.5 minutes, think about how the brand, in a way, got it wrong, because there was a major consumer backlash about it, saying, Pepsi, you don't have any credibility with these movements. Okay, so here goes.
But the love wasn't done. Yeah.
So, like when I first saw that, and I didn't know quite the intricacies of the debates, and Podil Nitin has perfectly captured it when you've said showing false emotions. And yes, a lot of there was a major consumer backlash against this, because lots of people thought, I mean, to use the word, people were going like, this is bullshit. That's not credible. People were seeing that Pepsi was trying to cash in on the emerging Black Lives Matter movement, the emerging discussions around Occupy or peace protests, or, I mean, everything was thrown in there if you looked at the sort of protests, the issues that people were protesting about. And they didn't have any credibility. And then you put in this celebrity who has no history at all. And, well, of course, it was a recipe for disaster. So it was pulled after one day, but it's a great example of what happens when brands get it wrong. And, it's been used as sort of a case study for those to sort of stay away from talking about my ethical bona fides when I really don't have that myself. Okay. Yep. Sorry. Move on. I mentioned Nike. Nike's another one, and Ben & Jerry's, of course. Now, just in the next couple of minutes before we go to a Q&A, I want you to think about some of your brands, some of your favorite brands. And let's just think about let's talk about the question I've posed in the left-hand bottom box there. How do some of your favorite brands make purchasing goods or services meaningful? Right? I want you to sort of think about, it can be a global, it can be a local, fine, it can be a very regional brand, but how do you think, how does the brand make it meaningful for you to purchase? Anyone want to have a go? Just maybe we'll just talk about this question before we get on to broader questions. Anyone want to have a go? Just sort of thinking about some of the ways that I've talked about, the 4 ways: brand culture, linking value, ethics, right? For example, just think about those 3 ways. No respondents? Okay, well, let's go back to a broader Q&A. So we've got some broader questions from, I'm just trying to bring up my box here. So we've got some broader questions from We've got some broader questions here from the audience. I've got Prashant Joshi who says, Prof, you spoke about how capitalism might sedimentarily decrease in the US, but I don't think capitalism is going to go anywhere. That's not quite what I meant. I meant that we're talking about, one of the phrases people talk about is, how can we tame capitalism? How can we sort of smoothen out its rough edges? I don't think capitalism, corporate or consumer, or any other form of capitalism is going anywhere. I do think we're going to see a sort of softer edge. I think that's going to emerge throughout all of this, and it would seem it would seem wrong. It would just seem wrong, culturally wrong, if brands behaved, and I'm only talking about brands here because this is a brand seminar, but if organizations and firms behaved as if they did prior to COVID. But I don't think consumer or corporate capitalism is going anywhere. I just think that communications are going to say, hey, we understand you. We understand that you're going through a strange moment. We understand, but here we are, and we're here to help you. Because brands ultimately are there to reduce tensions in consumers. That's what brands do. The brand stories and brands, I tell students in my classes, consumers do not buy goods and services. They buy solutions to reduce anxieties that you feel. Even if it's a hammer to nail something together, that package is bought, that product is bought to reduce an anxiety or tension that the person feels. The brands will be a bit more understanding, I think, about that. And so I don't think we're going to move into, you've talked about this idea of capitalism and communism. I don't think we're going to find too much of a mix in that way. I think many countries still have mixed economies, as you say, and quite rightly say. I don't think we're going to sort of alter that in too much. Mia Khalifa has asked, what about the collaboration of brands? Does this make local heritage brands go global, or they help global brands, or local brands help global brands to have more loyalty among a certain group of consumers and community, like Supreme collaborates with Louis Vuitton, yep, or Off-White collaborates with Nike? Yes, totally. I fully take your point there, and that's actually what happens in many places where brands. That's one of the strategies for brand managers and brand teams to take, is collaborating, partnering up in various ways, whether it's an alliance or another form, co-branding, for example, partnering up with the locally known brand and hitching on the back of that. And then over years, once the brand is becoming more well-known, then they can, in their own right, sort of move away from the partnership and move. But often, initially, to enter a market, yes, I fully agree with you. That's one strategy through which brands move into another location. Podil has asked me, what is brand consumption? I answered that. How are we going for time? I think maybe this will be my last question if we don't have any others. Purusharth has asked, sir, but it's very rare that companies live up to consumers' expectation, but still buyers fall for it. It is very rare. I think, this is what I've talked about is the ideal. And like any ideal, you're always going to have consumers who are brand loyal, who buy into it, but you're still going to have a huge chunk of people who are still, there are things they enjoy about the brand experience, but it doesn't quite live up to, as you say. And this is what brand managers do, right? They always try to close that gap. I don't want to say, I wouldn't want to use your phrase, buyers still fall for it, because that implies that, marketers are out there to dupe customers into buying things they don't necessarily want. I don't necessarily take that point of view. I think marketers tap into latent desires and tap into sometimes tensions and anxieties and provide possible solutions to help reduce those tensions and anxieties. Buyers buy into it, yes. They may not fall for it because we are part of this co-creative effort nowadays. I don't think that in many realms, in many ways, and we can tell brands, hey, you're not living up to we can tell them directly now, you're not living up to my expectation. And an astute brand manager will take on those critiques and that feedback on board. So it's not like you know, me as a big brand juggernaut is going in and, you know, sort of converting people to my way of thinking. I don't sort of see it that way. False emotions, and I think I'm going to leave it there. So I'm just going to move to my last slide. Thank you very much for taking part and listening. I have enjoyed the discussion. I hope you have enjoyed listening to me and you've got some things to take forward. If you do want to contact me, you're more than welcome to do so. My name is Professor Laknath Jayasinghe. That's my email address. Jayasinghe, Jayasinghe at JGU, Jindal Global University.edu.in. Please email me, introduce yourself, and hopefully I can help you with your queries. Thank you very much. And if I don't see you around, I hope we keep in touch. You can contact me on LinkedIn as well. Thank you. I'm going to leave the discussion now, and I hope to see you around sometime. Okay, goodbye to you all.